Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. So I'm carrying on speaking about Donald J. Trump, looking now back to his inauguration, which was, as the Constitution dictates, the 20th day of January 2017. So when he gave his inaugural address, Donald J. said that he would end American carnage. He was specifically alluding to gun violence. Well, he took absolutely no action whatsoever towards achieving that aim. He consistently spoke out about the only thing proven to reduce the incidence of gun violence, which would obviously be gun control, which would have fewer firearms which didn't have such a range, which didn't have such a high rate of fire and so on, more efforts to keep them out of the hands of those with mental illnesses, those with a criminal record and so on. And yes, there are background checks for certain sales, but not private sales, and blah, blah, blah. A higher tax on guns or bullets or anything like that, or more gun-free zones. No, he was dead against that, although he did vacillate a bit after that Highland school shooting. So anyway, he made absolutely no bid to reduce the frequency of these crimes. Now, I know the president can't do so unilaterally, only Congress can change the law, but he could at least have advocated for it, as Obama had done. His inflammatory language has indeed contributed to these gun crimes. There was an outspoken Trump supporter who shot dead several people at a synagogue. Now, I know that Trump didn't actually say, go and kill people in a synagogue, but Trump's incendiary rhetoric, his stoking of these crackpot conspiracy theories, makes this sort of thing more likely. The way he radiates racial hatred, and it's a very short distance from being a white nationalist to being a white supremacist to being an anti-Semite. These are all enmeshed. So Omarosa, who worked for President Trump, she recalled that the president wanted to take the oath of office not on the Holy Bible, but on a copy of The Art of the Deal. Now, I don't know Omarosa to ever have lied, but he was talked out of it. Had he done so, even the blind faith of the Christian right in him might have wavered for a moment. It was only with difficulty that Omarosa was able to dissuade him from taking his oath on his own book. So being president grotesquely inflated Trump's already tumescent ego. It reached absolutely spectacular proportions, and it became ever more unmoored from reality. His mind has long since been unhinged. There was been incipient pre-Alzheimer's there for some time, and his father had Alzheimer's, and it runs in the family. He exhibited so many of the symptoms, like inability to cope with stares, or forgetting where he is, or completely going off topic, just a word salad when he's speaking. The man is profoundly unanalytical. He's difficulty telling truth from falsehood and fact from fantasy, even at the best of times, and that was exacerbated by surrounding himself with toadies, yes men, and smooth-talking flatterers. He got most of his information, or should I say disinformation, from Fox News. He was therefore inhabiting a Trump echo chamber. So Donald Trump really suffers derangement of mind. The British say that no Prime Minister leaves Downing Street entirely sane, and I would say that applies even more so to Donald J. Trump. And there's a book about this by Dr. David Owen, who was British Foreign Secretary. He's a psychiatrist, about leadership, political leadership and mental health, and how it can actually diminish someone's sanity. People going into it perfectly mentally healthy to begin with, their inability to read a room, their inability to empathise and so on, it's simply the pressures of the job. Now, some people thought that Trump would grow into the office, and I have to confess I fondly hoped that he might do so as well, that the office would make the man. But I was dead wrong. Trump's blatant lying recommenced within hours of being sworn in. I thought he might see that this position is freighted with such significance. I owe it to the people to do a decent job and not to let them down. So he claimed that it didn't rain during his inauguration. Everyone could see it was raining. Yet another flagrant lie, he told, despite the fact that anyone could instantly disprove it. So the crowd size at inauguration was half of what it had been at Obama's inauguration. Despite ample data and photo evidence, Trump and his spokesman, Sean Spicer, went on telling the most irrefragable lies, and that was from day one. And Spicer, he got himself into a tizzy of rage, just a hissy fit with the media for reporting the news. which was that the crowds were much smaller than they had been for Obama. The wholesale deglutition of proven lies by the Trump base is one of the most staggering things about his pernicious presidency. It's the war on truth. And the thing is, he sometimes won it. So he's an idol and he misconducts himself with the most egregious ill grace. And it doesn't trouble the Trump base one whit. Almost immediately, President Trump, he tried to subvert every arm of the federal government. He wished to co-opt them into the Trump Organization, as he'd more or less successfully done with Fox News. Not that that's part of the federal government. It then became the semi-official mouthpiece of the Trump Organization. He abdicated his responsibilities to the people, and that's who Trump is there to serve. And obviously, as we know, the people eventually told him, "You're fired," which was his favourite line when he was on The Apprentice. But he still seemed to think this was just a reality TV show about him projecting his outsized ego. He wanted everyone to serve him as an individual, not him to serve the people. He genuinely didn't comprehend the difference between an individual and the office of the president. No wonder he admired and envied autocrats who had illimited power and there was no constitutional check on what they could do. So days after Trump was sworn as president, he went to Langley, Virginia. Now, Langley Farm is the HQ of the Central Intelligence Agency, which is America's organization for spying overseas. He gave them a stump speech filled with lies about how he'd won more votes than anybody else. So the CIA, the FBI, National Security Agency, Homeland Security, they all said they were almost certain that the Russian external intelligence service, Razvedka, Smeshny Razvedka, Внешняя Razvedka, had helped Trump win the election. And Congress voted to concur. A Republican majority in both houses voted for this. So there was this full spectrum consensus. The intelligence community had said it with a high degree of confidence. And Australian intelligence, Dutch intelligence, British intelligence, lots of friendly intelligence agencies had warned the United States in the months leading up to this that the Russians were flagrantly trying to assist the Trump campaign. Fancy Bear and the Internet Research Agency were Russian organizations aimed at disseminating damaging statements, sometimes true statements, against the Democrats. They discouraged African Americans from voting, noting that was a key constituency for the Democrats. They did everything they could to propagandize for Trump. So US intelligence able to give chapter and verse on this, in which SVR units were behind it and so on. Putin was asked about this on Fox News, and the notoriously stony-faced Putin started laughing. I mean, the man has no sense of humour. He only laughs. There's no other way to deal with being exposed of having done something outrageous. It was a slam dunk. It was proved beyond a penumbra of doubt. The appeal to ridicule by Putin was a formal logical fallacy. So Trump denied that Russia had assisted him. He began his disparagement of the US intelligence services, which is why the CIA wanted to rebuild the relationship, reach out to him, offer rapprochement. There was some conciliatory invitation to visit them. That's why he was there on a Sunday, and many staff came in on a Sunday to prove that they would serve him to the best of their ability, because he held the office of the president. So the Republicans used to be the party of national security and of law and order. Under Trump, they became the party of Putin, of of lawlessness and disorder. So Trump has such an enormous ego, but he's very susceptible to flattery. Compliments will get you everywhere. Now, as a trained spy, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin played Trump like a fiddle. It wasn't difficult. For the first time in history, Russia openly backed a US presidential candidate. They didn't even used to endorse the communist candidate. When Russia was a communist country, there's a communist part of the USA, always fielded a candidate for the presidency. Now, it's true that Trump always violates norms. Normalcy can be overrated. Mindless conformity should not be exalted, but conventions that he disregarded were often there for a good reason. One of them was not to savage former presidents, and he turned on them and denounced them viciously. Trump said he had the best people, yet he had to fire so many people and others resigned. He had the highest turnover in office of any president ever. He hired a national security advisor despite being warned by the FBI that this guy, Mike Flynn, had been compromised by contacts with the Russian Secret Service. Flynn lied about these contacts. Within days, Flynn had to resign. he'd lied under oath to the FBI. He should have been prosecuted for that. It wasn't long before several Trump appointees ended up in prison, and then Trump was claimed to scarcely know the people he'd been photographed having met on dozens of occasions. Within days, Trump had signed several executive orders, and these EOs included one to end the Affordable Care and Patient Protection Act. It had been dubbed Obamacare by Republicans to make it unpopular. What's bad with healthcare being affordable, and why is it bad that patients are protected? Republicans are obviously against that. Far rather that patients are not protected and healthcare is unaffordable, so people can all die in agony. But anyway, perhaps the real name of the Affordable Care and Patient Protection Act was too difficult to spell, so they called it Obamacare. They were trying to shift the spotlight from solving the problem of tens of millions of people without healthcare onto a man they had monstered for his colour. Many Republicans falsely accused Obama of being a Marxist and a Muslim and all sorts of drivel like that. They said he was a Muslim as though that were a bad thing. Yeah, there are millions of Muslim Americans and their number is growing fast, much faster than that of Christians. The US has got Muslim allies all over the world. Muslim countries have been on America's side in various wars. Anyway, so Trump appointed Dr. Ben Carson as his Secretary of Housing. This surgeon said that no Muslim should ever be allowed to be president. So Dr. Carson won the hearts of Islamophobes like that. Maybe the Republican base could forgive Dr. Carson being black because he's vilifying an outgroup even more reviled than African Americans. But Trump soon began to test the bounds of impunity. But would the Republican Party denounce him for it? They had multiple opportunities to stand up for law and constitutionality, which they claimed to hold sacrosanct. They decided to be their movers and shirkers. So Trump flagrantly breached the Emoluments Clause. And that is that the president mustn't seek to personally enrich himself from his presidency. I mean, just beyond his salary, obviously. So he had U.S. military personnel stay at hotels that he owned and getting money going to him from that. Federal government employees were told to stay in his hotels. People on minimum wage have to pay into Trump's business, therefore. The vice president flew to the Republic of Ireland, and Vice President Pence stayed in a Trump hotel even though it was the far side of the country from Dublin. And US dignitaries in Ireland, they stay in the US ambassador's residence, which is in Dublin. So the US presidency was being turned into a wholly owned subsidiary of the Trump organization. And the GOP was willfully blind to this blatant abuse of office. Within a week of being sworn in, Trump had brought in his so-called Muslim ban. There was no prior notice. The executive order came into immediate effect, and it banned people from several Muslim countries, whether they were Muslims or not. And Muslims who were not from those, I think it was 8 countries, were not banned. Even then there were exemptions. You could be a Muslim from Pakistan, allowed into the United States because you're related to a citizen. You could be a non-Muslim from Pakistan who's not allowed into the United States. So it was that utterly irrational. Anyway, and it caused chaos at airports. And, how many Americans were killed by Muslim terrorists in the US in 2021? 0. 2020? 0. 2019? 0. 2018? 0. 2017? 0. 2016? 0. You have to go back to, I think it's the Boston Marathon bombing, which is about 2013, when I think, 5 people were killed? Of course, deeply regrettable. I'd rather it was 0. But honestly, compared to 33,000 gun deaths, it's an infinitesimally small threat to Americans. And yes, there'll be the occasional American who's killed abroad by Islamist terrorists, but within the United States itself, the risk is virtually 0. You're far more likely to be killed by lightning. But anyway, we're not trying to ban lightning. So in 2017, Trump, he slashed tax for the super rich. This enriched himself. His tax reform had a particular tax for, wait for it, tax cut for golf club owners. Now, greed is one of Trump's ruling passions. This tax cut hugely increased the deficit. It was a massive redistribution of wealth from the poorest to the richest. He promised to get rid of the national debt in 8 years. He did the exact opposite. It was $26 trillion by mid-2021. His economic genius raised the unemployment rate to 15%, a level which hadn't been seen for 35 years. All countries suffered an economic downturn consequent upon COVID-19, but the United States had higher unemployment than almost any other developed country. Trump pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is approved of by almost every economist. The TPP had allowed the United States to reach new heights of prosperity. Trump denied the scientific truth on climate change, and he's supported by many flat earthers. He slashed the budget to find green energy. I mean, that would have also given America energy independence. It's better for the environment, it's cheaper energy, they no longer have to care about the Middle East and stuff like that. It's a win-win-win. Anyway, he then had the temerity to say he was an environmentalist. Trump, he abolished federal regulations restricting greenhouse gas emissions, toxic air pollution, and water pollution. Does he want to poison his own people? Anyway, he loosened the Clean Power Act. Federal construction projects are now allowed to pollute like never before. He permitted drilling in the Arctic region. Okay, so that lowered oil prices. There were certain benefits to that. Anyway, the Republicans had railed against Obama for signing executive orders. Every president signs executive orders. They're allowed to. It's being presidential, you might say, because Republicans called it creeping dictatorship. But Trump signed more EOs than any other president in history, and there was not a peep of protest out of the Republican Party. I mean, I'm not against signing EOs as such, but you can't say it's dreadful if one party does it, but splendiferous if another does it. How moronic and hypocritical is that? So Trump, he removed regulations on labor, the environment, and health, so Americans can be more exploited, more poisoned, and more unhealthy than ever. Make America great again. Anyway, in 2017, Congress repealed the Affordable Care Act with Trump's imprimatur. Trump had talked about replacing it. He didn't delve into particulars. He's not a details man, or as Bill Clinton said a few years before he knew that Trump was going to be president, Trump was fact-free. Anyway, no alternative to affordable care was mooted. 23 million people were left with no health insurance whatsoever. Many chronic illnesses, people suffering chronic illnesses, tens of thousands of people died prematurely and totally avoidably from conditions they could not afford to treat. Others suffered horrific health consequences, suffered just incalculably. And that is because of what Trump urged his party to do. So President Trump said he had kept health insurance for those with pre-existing conditions. This is yet another outright lie. People who are born with pre-existing conditions cannot afford health insurance unless they're multimillionaires. His move on healthcare was a death sentence for those who are ill, including those who are ill through no fault of their own, because they were wicked enough, stupid enough to choose to be born with congenital conditions. Donald Trump was turning it into the new Shkreli. So as a candidate, Trump vowed to save Medicare. He pledged he would save Medicaid. And as president, he did the precise opposite of his explicit campaign promise. He assured the public that medicines would be cheaper and better when he became president. He didn't offer any explication for that, how that could possibly be true. How can you make them cheaper and better at the same time? Cheaper, I mean, how much cheaper? And better, like more effective, or they work faster, or there are no side effects, or what? And I suppose tens of millions of his imbecilic base must have swallowed that one, hook, line, and sinker. It's galling that tens of millions of people fall for these ludicrous and totally unsubstantiated claims. Talk about too good to be true. So that's it, bait and switch. The bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. He's impudent enough to do that and get away with it, be believed all the time. And that is the staggering paradox, the way that Republicans are never afraid to lie, but Democrats are quite often afraid to tell the truth, to say that Trump is a prolific felon, which he undoubtedly is. So Trump vowed to appoint judges who would overturn Roe versus Wade, and this is one of the few campaign pledges he fulfilled. He did appoint pro-life judges, including Neil Gorsuch. He was at my college, University College, Oxford. I actually didn't know him, even though we overlapped. Anyway, Roe versus Wade still stands. I can't see how the Trump administration has prevented a single abortion. Incidentally, the US military carries out abortions on its personnel, and indeed their spouses. Now, Trump, he's the commander-in-chief. He could have said, I'm giving you an order, you're not allowed to do that. Those doctors and nurses, they're military personnel, but he hasn't. So, under his direction, indirect direction, thousands of abortions have been performed by the US federal government, funded by US taxpayers. But anyway, by removing affordable health care, many women cannot now afford contraception. Therefore, they were more likely to become pregnant where they did not wish to be pregnant, and therefore more likely to terminate their babies. Trump's policies led directly to more abortions. Anyway, the president, he rescinded workplace protections for homosexuals in federal employment. And so that was a sop to the anti-gay religious maniacs. So this was an unanticipated move because, as I say, I don't think Trump actually is a homophobe. He's just deeply amoral. If that's going to play well with the core constituency, he'll do it. I mean, the gays can be thrown to the lions, I should say. So Vice President Pence was asked, if you permit discrimination, he said, as if people would discriminate. He didn't actually say no. Well, yeah, they definitely would. Have you heard of the Jim Crow laws? Yeah, so discrimination has gone on, can go on, does go on in the United States. We don't have Jim Crow anymore. I know that must be a matter of deep regret to many Trumpsters. So several gun massacres were perpetrated under Trump, and he said that he would introduce a gun control law. Now, this led to howls of protest from the anti-gun control caucus. So he backed down on this one very quickly. He's a flip-flopper. The guy's totally invertebrate. He doesn't know his own mind. Does he have his own mind? So it shows how utterly untrustworthy he is. If he thought being communist made him more popular, he would be. I mean, after all, he's best buddies with the communist tyrants like Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, Vladimir Putin, and so on. So Trump rescinded the Cole Memorandum, and that provided guaranteed for certain states which had decriminalized cannabis. Now that's odd, since leading Republicans like John Boehner, formerly their leader in the House, recognized that decriminalization was the way to go and became executive of a marijuana company. So a Republican president was going against states' rights. So anyway, Donald J. Trump had vowed to bring in far worse than waterboarding for suspects when he became president. Now, the sadists were disappointed that he didn't do that, but yet again, it was a broken election pledge. There were 5 federal executions under Trump. That's the highest since the 1960s. He called himself a Christian. Every major church opposes capital punishment. He was also breaking with a convention whereby if there's an execution scheduled and it's towards the end of the presidential term, then you delay it and you let the next president decide whether there's going to be a pardon or something. So Trump and his party pride themselves on being tough. They so often lambast the left for being crybabies, promoting the cult of victimhood and so on. But you see how they often say they're victims, Trump and his party, how touchy they are. You'll see what whinge bags there are. He was always whining that the media are unfair to me. How ironic that Trump should be so filled with self-pity. If the media didn't act as a megaphone for him, he was outraged. He was offended when the press reported his words accurately. Trump would be enraged when they reported his deeds, truthfully. The refrain was, they're very unfair to me. So if a journalist asked him a decent question, he would say that person was nasty and fail to answer the question. So how pathetic was that? Anyway, so within a year of Trump assuming office, it was bruited that he was senile. As I say, probably early stage Alzheimer's. So there were multiple symptoms of it, being disoriented, not being able to go up even one step. He was so muddled, his speech was slurred and so on. He'd lost all emotional self-control. You can watch videos of Trump from 10 years before he became president, and the contrast is remarkable. He's experienced a dramatic declension in his cognitive faculties. You know, back in, say, 2007, Trump was in command of himself. He could feign decorum. He came across as a plausible business executive. But things had changed. So Trump did not attend many briefings as president. He had the attention span of a mayfly. He never read any files unless his name was in them. He blurted out top secrets to Russian diplomats that had come from America's key ally, Israel, and on and on and on. And he's screwed up basically everything. So the sort of person to fail kindergarten. So he appointed many people from the Trump organization, Hope Hicks on the strength of her having been a bikini model. Anyway, he saw the presidency as an adjunct to his business. And many of those he appointed were utterly unsuitable, had no pertinent experience, including his daughter and his son-in-law, who, by the way, were Democrats and pro-abortion till months before they were appointed to these positions. So what do you think of that, Christian fundamentalists? His daughter Ivanka, who rejected her Lord and became Jewish. I don't care what religion you are, what religion you change to, but if you're a Christian fundamentalist, you should think that's heretical. Anyway, so Trump lamented that the people he appointed, he did so because they looked very nice and turned out to be woefully inept. Almost as though it's wrong to judge a book by its cover. Well, there he was, totally superficial. But that's enough an introduction to Trump when he was actually president. Toodaloo.